Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of the Fishing Teacher, and appreciate you guys swinging by the channel to check out today's episode. And guys, today we have one of those videos that's really going to help your fishing success, and it's going to help you make a big leap in your consistency as an angler. I want to go in detail, give you a detailed little seminar on wind and bass, how wind affects bass, what it makes them do, the type of lures they prefer, different times of year. There is a ton of variables surrounding wind, so I want to go into that in today's video. This is going to be one of those videos that's good just to put it on while you're driving down the road or while you're working out in the garage or something like that, because if there's three things in bass fishing you have to understand more than anything else, it's how water temperature, water clarity, and how wind, those three factors affect bass. And today we're going to talk about wind. Also, guys, we're getting started. Thank you very much for everybody that's been taking time to subscribe here to the Fishing Teacher. We've had some pretty good growth over the past month, man. We're really pushing hard to try to hit 50,000 subscribers. We're only about halfway there, but that's a good way to support the channel. If you'd like to do that, just hit the subscribe button, hit the like button on the videos. And also, guys, quick reminder that Tackle Warehouse has got a big Black Friday sale going on right now. They got like 15 to 25% off on a bunch of stuff on the website. I'll put my Tackle Warehouse link in the description of this video. And if you guys can use and bookmark that link of mine, that's a great way to support the Fishing Teacher. Anything you purchase from Tackle Warehouse, if you use my link, we get a small percentage of a commission on the sale. So appreciate that. Everybody's been doing it. And finally, guys, anyone interested in booking an on-the-water lesson with me, just go to my Facebook page, Randy Blaukat Professional Angler. Shoot me a private message. Do most of my lessons here on Table Rock and Stockton Lake, Missouri. So we'll get you all set up with that if you shoot me a message. Okay, this is something that should be on the forefront of your mind as a bass angler. It's like when you get ready to go fishing or you're out on the lake or something like that, one of the first things you need to do is just see what the wind situation is, because wind comes in tons of different forms. You've got wind that comes from all directions: south wind, southeast, southwest, west, northwest, northeast, east, just all over the place based upon the weather patterns that come in. And the direction and the speed of the wind in correlation with the water clarity and the water temperature is what you have to understand. When you're talking about wind and trying to make a game plan around it and try to figure out, how you need to fish, you can't just look at the wind, because you have to have all three of those connected: wind, water clarity, and water temperature, in order to assess that decision, or that decision-making process. So what I want to do is without going into like an 8-hour seminar, which I could on this, I want to briefly go through every season of the year and talk to you a little bit about wind and what it does to the fish, and sort of what you need to do to adjust to it, and situations that are better than not. So when you're talking about wind in different times of the year, don't really think about it in terms of months. Think about it in terms of your water temperatures. So when we're talking about this, I want to talk about every water temperature gradient, 10-degree differences, like 40 in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, 70s, 80s, and on so forth like that. Those are going to be the gradients we talk about. So let's start out with colder water and as it warms up. If you're fishing in cold water, like water temperatures in the 40s, this is one situation where wind is not going to be your friend. It's like you really, in the wintertime when the water temperature is cold, you really don't need, or really don't want wind, because it doesn't really do anything to activate the fish. The mood and the personality of the fish and the depth zones that they're usually at when the water temperature is in the 40s is not conducive beneficially to have much wind at all. So when the water's in the 40s, guys, I don't want much wind. At the most, I want just like a little ripple on the water. It's not going to, I don't want to have to deal with it, because it's not going to affect my lure selection to take advantage of the wind. And that's what we're going to try to do in the video today, is how to take advantage of the wind. So days that are windy in the wintertime, the only thing it's going to do, it's going to make it more difficult for you to fish and more uncomfortable for you to fish, because If the water temperature is in the 40s, more than likely the air is cold. And if it's windy, it's going to be hard to move around. It's going to be, the wind chill is going to be bad. It just sucks to fish on a windy day when the water temperature is in the 40s. Okay, now as the water temperature gets up in the 50s, that is when things begins to change a little bit, because once you sort of reach that magical zone of water temperatures in the 50s, you start to have a little bit of a movement in the fish. Now, this can be, when you're talking about water temperatures in the 50s, you can talk about, springtime of the year, fall time of the year, anything that goes. So let's just go through the seasons in relationship to the water temperature, and then we'll come back around to it in the fall time too. But when the water temperature starts to get into the 50s in the springtime of the year, initially, once it hits 50 degrees, again, you're going to have a population of the bass, usually the larger bass, that begin to move a little bit shallower. And most of the time, they're going to be like in less than 10 foot of water, depending upon your water clarity. It could be deeper, shallower, based upon, if the water visibility is 2 feet or if it's 15 feet clarity. But initially, you're going to have a larger population of bigger fish start to move up into those pre-spawn areas a little bit shallower. Now, this is the time where you do want some wind. Once that water is in the 50s, wind is going to help activate those fish, primarily for your more reaction bait. So a good way to take advantage of it is if you have some type of day where the wind's blowing, over 10 miles an hour, get a big spinner bait out there, get a big, chatterbait or something like that, a larger crankbait, and target those wind-blown areas when the water's in the 50s, especially the spinner bait. A spinner bait, when the water's in the 50s in the springtime of the year, is a great way to catch bass if the wind is blowing. If the wind is not blowing and when your water temperature's in the 50s, most of the time I like to slow down, and probably a jig is my number one bait. Just some type of a full-size jig. I really like brown and orange that time of year with a green pumpkin trailer. You'll really notice a difference as far as the techniques required to catch bass based upon the wind once that water temperature starts getting in the 50s. But that's usually when I'm starting to think big spinnerbait, big chatterbait. And another thing is when you have water temperatures in the 50s and you have some wind, this is the time of year, in the springtime of the year, you want to use big baits, because in the early spring, the shad are larger than they've been at any time of the year. They're mature, they're big. The gizzard shad and threadfin shad are big, so try to concentrate with your larger baits. Again, your big swim baits, big spinner baits, large full-size chatterbaits, all that type of deal is going to be really good. Now, when the water temperature gets in the 60s in the springtime of the year, this is the time of year when I don't want much wind. Again, sort of like the winter time. Not that it doesn't activate them, but what happens when the water temperature gets in the 60s in the spring, it's not the same in the fall, which we'll talk about here in a second, but when you have water temperatures start to get in the 60s and approaching 70 degrees in the springtime of the year, usually April or May, you have a lot of bass in the shallowest water they're going to be all year long. Those bass are up there looking for areas to bed. They're, garden fry. They're actually spawning. You got, bass cruising, looking for beds. You got females looking for those beds that the males fan out. You got a lot of bass in water less than 5 foot deep. So that time of year, I want to be able to fish super slow, and I want to see in the water as much as I can. And that's when I want a calm day. I don't want hardly any wind. And that allows me to throw my slow baits, like my wacky rigs, my weightless lizards, Texas rig baits on really light line, maybe like a floating worm. These are all baits that you do not want any wind. When those fish are thinking about spawning or in and around that mood of spawning, they don't chase reaction baits. So this is the time of year where your crankbaits and your moving baits are probably the least effective. When the fish are really focused on spawning, you don't hardly ever catch them on a spinnerbait or a crankbait. It's always a slow bait. That's just what they want. Okay, now once you start getting past the spawn, you start getting into the post-spawn and into the summertime of the year. Let's say, for example, May, June, July, August, during that period, that is when wind is really technique specific to the area that you're fishing. And again, wind is always going to activate the fish to some extent, but it does not activate the bass once that water temperature gets over 70 degrees like it does when it's in the 50s. When that water's in the 50s in the springtime of the year, that's when wind will activate fish to really get aggressive and bite. But in the summertime of the year or the post-spawn time of the year, when you have wind like that, it helps out a little bit, but not much, because based upon how you're fishing, it can hurt you or help you. Let's say, for example, you're deep cranking in June. You're deep cranking river ledges, you're deep cranking drop-offs, typical summertime fishing. You don't really want much wind because you want to be able to focus on boat positioning, and the water is so deep that the wind is the current generation and the water displacement and breaking up the surface, light intensity is not that big of a factor because you're fishing deeper. So in a situation like that, I do not want any wind. But let's say, for example, if I'm, it's July or June and I decide to run up into the dirty water area of the lake where I'm fishing and I want to throw a square bill crankbait on a rocky bank. In a situation like that, yeah, a little bit of wind's going to help out. It always helps out in warmer water, shallow water, if you have some wind. So that is one thing to remember. It's like your reaction baits and your moving baits can still be productive in the post-spawn in the summertime of the year if you have some wind, especially if you don't have shade. If you do have shade, you don't need any wind. Let's say, for example, you're flipping a tube or flipping a worm underneath boat docks. It's, water temperature's 75, 80 degrees. You don't need any wind because those fish are reacting or they're setting on those shade lines. But if you're fishing out in the open, sometimes a little bit more. So I guess what I'm saying in terms of activating the fish, the wintertime and the summertime are the two times a year where wind has the least effect on bass. The wind basically in the wintertime and the summertime either makes it easier to fish or more difficult to fish in terms of boat positioning. Okay, now this changes again once you start getting into fall time of the year, because wind in the fall, in my opinion, is the most critical time of year to understand wind. Once you start getting into like late September and October, the fall months of the year, let's say from the second week of September up until like the first week of December, this is the fall period of the year. There's three different seasons within the fall. There's early fall, mid fall, and late fall. But fall time is critical as far as picking your technique and the type of water you want to fish in terms of the wind blowing or not blowing. If you do not have, you can catch fish in all situations in the fall based upon your technique. Say, for example, the wind's not blowing at all. This is a great time of year in the fall time of the year to fish a topwater bait. If I don't have any wind in the fall time of the year, I'm fishing a topwater. Like a walking topwater, it could be a buzzbait, could be a whopper plopper, could be a popper, whatever. It just depends on the lake that I'm fishing. So I want some days that don't have much wind that time of year. It's really, really productive for the fish. And the same if I'm flipping and pitching shallow cover that has some type of a shade ambush point on it. I don't really want any wind. But on those days in the fall time of the year where it is windy, let's say you have wind over 10 miles an hour, say 10 to 20 mile an hour winds, this is when you can really capitalize on a variety of techniques, because same thing sort of happens in the fall time as it does during the pre-spawn, is you have bigger populations of fish starting to move up into shallower water, less than 10 feet deep, primarily like in October, November, and early December. And once those fish move up into that shallow water, another factor in the fall time of the year is you usually have lower water levels, and the water's starting to cool down. So the combination of the cooling water, the falling water, and the fact that the wind's blown a little bit, once you start getting water temperatures in the 50s and 60s in the fall time of the year, this is when they really put the feed on. And this is when you need to fish moving baits, cover a lot of water, like a lipless crankbait, a spinner bait, a glide bait, a swim bait, anything that you can reel horizontally through the water column on a day where the wind's blowing over 10 miles an hour is a great way to catch bass in the fall time of the year, October, November, and December, especially if you have clouds or wind. If you have the water temperatures in the 50s and 60s, guys, and you got a cloudy day and you got a day where the wind's blowing 10 or 20 miles an hour, especially if that wind's out of the south, you're going to catch some good fish on a moving bait. This is primo situation for a moving bait with that. And another thing to remember in the fall time of the year is try to concentrate on shade. If you have some banks that have some shade on them and some wind on them, those big reaction baits, again, like the spinner baits and the crank baits and the swim baits, are just by far the best techniques that you can fish. Run the shade, run the wind. That's the time you really want to take advantage of it. So that's just a real brief overview, guys. We could go into detail on each season and fine tooth, but when people say that, you know, the wind is your friend or whatever, it is sometimes, but sometimes you don't want it. It's like every single technique in bass fishing has a wind-specific window where it works the best, and that's stuff we can talk about at some later point. But anyway, guys, I just wanted to give you a little intro on wind, and hope it helps you guys do some good out there, and really appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you guys.